Hello. We are going to get started. How's everyone doing?
Pretty good.
First day of AWP.
Yeah?
Welcome to our 2023 annual conference and book fair in Seattle, Washington. I'm Kenyatta Rogers, member of the AWP Board of Directors. Here's a visual description of myself. I'm about 6'2". I have locks. They're tied back. I'm wearing a peach coat with a watch. I'm a black man. That's about 6'2". The Association of Writers and Writing Programs is a small but mighty nonprofit that amplifies the voices of writers and academic programs and organizations that serve them, all while championing diversity and excellence in creative writing. I'm a member of AWP, provides me with the writing resources year-round, but just as importantly, it allows me to support other writers, especially those who are just starting out. My membership dues help the writers find meaningful careers and publication opportunities and make services like the Writer to Writer Mentorship Program possible. If you haven't already, I invite you to become an AWP member today. It's been great. My first AWP was in 2009, so it's been a very, very long time. We're delighted to bring you today this event. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of our conference sponsors and literary partners for hosting this event, the National Book Awards. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present the extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference affordable and accessible. Please join me in thanking all of our conference sponsors and partners for their support and participation. Let's do that right now. Before we start, a few housekeeping things. Please silence your cell phones. Remember, there's no flash photography allowed during the presentation. Respect seats marked and reserved for attendees with accessibility. Those are the ones that are right here in the front row. And please give the authors about 10 minutes after the presentation before going to the book signing table to approach them and have your book signed, because things get crazy out here post meetings. Lastly, I'd like to ask that we're aware of our fellow attendees who may have disabilities and help AWP be more accessible. Specifically, if you see a barrier to accessibility, let us know by texting or calling our accessible hotline at 240-269-6635. I will say that one more time. Our accessibility hotline, it is 240-269-6635. You can text or call that. Or if you happen to see me around anywhere, you can stop me and let me know that you need something addressed. Please also be aware of those with invisible disabilities and do not question someone's use of an accommodation. Thank you. And now it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome Ruth Dickey, who will introduce this fantastic event.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Ruth Dickey, and I have the tremendous pleasure of serving as Executive Director of the National Book Foundation. Thank you so much, Kenyatta Rogers, for that warm welcome, and many thanks to Sarika Mehta and Erica Barnath, who for their ASL interpretation today. Thanks to Nicole Kochi for live captioning, and for all the folks working behind the scenes to make the AWP 2023 conference possible. And thanks to all of you in the room and those of you who are tuning in online for being with us today. As a national organization, we're grateful for opportunities like AWP to gather with so many writers, readers, literary organizations, and publications in one place. In addition to presenting the National Book Awards, which have honored the exceptional literature published in the United States since 1950, the National Book Foundation works year-round to reach readers all over the country with education and public programs. We're constantly trying to figure out how to connect with readers everywhere at once, in person and online. And this spring, we just launched a new special newsletter called Read with NBF to share behind-the-scenes interviews with our 2022 National Book Award winners. I hope you'll subscribe, and I'd love to know what you think. You can find more about Read with NBF and our upcoming events at our website, which is nationalbook.org. Today, it's my tremendous pleasure to be in conversation with two brilliant National Book Award honorees on the power of poetry for reader and author alike. Donika Kelly, author of Bestiary, a 2016 National Book Award longlister, and most recently, The Renunciations, and Danez Smith, author of Don't Call Us Dead, a 2017 National Book Award finalist, and most recently, Homie. Danez and Donika's beautiful books will be available for sale with thanks to Third Place Books after this event. We'll start today's event with readings from each of them, and then we'll have a conversation. And after the program, they'll be signing books outside the ballroom. And I hope you'll all go and get your books signed. So now, I'm delighted to introduce our two authors. Donika Kelly is the author of The Renunciations, winner of the Anisfeld-Wolf Book Award in Poetry, and Bestiary, winner of the 2015 Cave Canem Poetry Prize, a Hurston Wright Legacy Award for Poetry, and the Kate Tufts Discovery Award. Kelly's poetry has been a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Publishing Triangle Awards, the Lambda Literary Awards, and longlisted for the National Book Award. A Cave Canem graduate fellow and member of the collective Poets at the End of the World, she has also received fellowships from Lannan and the Fine Arts Work Center. She earned an MFA from the University of Texas at Austin and a PhD in English from Vanderbilt University. Her poems have been published in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The Paris Review, and elsewhere. Donika lives in Iowa City with her wife, the nonfiction writer Melissa Phoebos, and is an assistant professor in the English department at the University of Iowa, where she teaches creative writing. And Danez Smith is the author of 3 collections, including Homie and Don't Call Us Dead. They have won a Forward Prize for Best Collection, the Minnesota Book Award in Poetry, the Lambda Literary Award for Gay Poetry, the Kate Tufts Discovery Award, and have been a finalist for the NAACP Image Award in Poetry, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the National Book Award. Danez's poetry and prose has been featured in Vanity Fair, The New York Times, The New Yorker, GQ, Best American Poetry, and on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Danez is a member of the Dark Noise Collective. Former co-host of the Webby-nominated podcast Verses, they are the recipient of fellowships from the Poetry Foundation, Princeton, United States Artists, the McKnight Foundation, and the Montalvo Art Center, Cave Canem, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Danez has been featured as part of Forbes' 30 Under 30 annual list and is the winner of a Pushcart Prize. They live in Minneapolis near their people. Let's have a huge round of applause for these amazing poets. And we didn't pick who would like to read first.
Oh, I'll read first.
Great.
So should I just sit here and read?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Oh, what a pleasure to be here. I usually find AWP very stressful and overwhelming, and it hasn't been yet, so just holding space for that to be possible. What a delight to also be in conversation with Danez. Okay, I'm gonna read a few poems from The Renunciations, and then I'm gonna read 2 new poems, one of which I don't think I've read out loud before, to people who are not my sweetie. Okay, so the first poem I'll read is titled, In the Chapel of St. Mary's. I can't tell you what happened there, why I entered the sanctuary a non-believer, only that I've been thinking about worship, the altar of the body, and supplication for some time. My thoughts turn, as they often do in the season of absence, to my wife and how tired a God can get when called, and too often for little reason but loneliness. Of course, I don't mean God here, but rather the woman I love who alters the orbit of my life, pulls me with the density of light toward her, the draw thinner when she is farther away as she is now. I try to find comfort in the inevitability of science when what I lack is faith. The sanctuary, the stained glass, 4 girls saturating it with soft chatter, small pots of stargazer lilies, a lace ribbon for each pew. This place is full of faith in the unknown, and I don't know how to believe in what I cannot see. Tonight, I will drive through the foothills and into the valley. I will try to make a little practice to trust you are with me, even though you are somewhere else. So this next poem is titled Portrait of My Father as a Winged Boar. And there is a thing that I think is helpful to know, which is that Pegasus has a sibling. So, which is like a funny way to put it, but when Perseus cuts off the head of Medusa from her neck, from her blood hitting the ground, people have argued about this with me, and I'm like, does it matter? So like Pegasus emerges. And I've always had the question, where did the horse come from? There was no answer for that question. But then there is a sibling, and the sibling is either a winged boar or it is a golden giant man. If it's the golden giant man, then he becomes the father to Gerion, who tends the red cattle that Heracles steals for one of his 12 laborers. So if you read Autobiography of Red, like that guy. So I'm talking about his daddy a little bit, but also my dad. Portrait of my father as a winged boar. When his mother dies, by metal turned slicing blade, from her blood springs my father, whose name I refuse to say as he refuses his father, the half-known man who sired him. In the dry LA light, the boy, my father, turns so that he is caught. One way, a winged boar, another, a giant, a gold blade of a man, both high-skulled, thick-maned, a juvenile without a sounder, a boy without a mother. He recognizes himself only in the man, carves himself into golden armor, but the rutting fact of him, the curved tooth, the thick neck, and beating wings, trembles beneath his skin. Whatever sheen the California sun burnishes out of his body, whatever good work his thickening hand compels, whatever woman he touches in the afternoon on the roof, he cannot deny his firstborn, his red fledgling, her many heads and hands, what he makes for her. A junk bike she loves, cattle, red in the field, a mirror, a red wreckage of her body. And the last poem I'll read from the Renunciations is one of my favorites. These are actually like three of my favorites. But this is The Moon Rose Over the Bay. I had a lot of feelings.
I love this poem.
And there are two poems that have this title. There are actually like secretly three poems that have this title. I like all of them very much, but this was the one that goes in the book. So The Moon Rose Over the Bay. I had a lot of feelings. The home I've been making inside myself started with a raising, a brush clearing, the thorn and nettle, the blackberry bush falling under the bush hog. Then I rested. A cycle fallow said, winter said, the ground is too cold to break pony, said, I almost set fire to it all, lit a match, watched it ghost in the wind. Came the thaw, came the melting snowpack, the flooded river, new groundwater, the well risen. I stood in the mud field and called it a pasture, stood with a needle in my mouth and called it a song. Everything rushed past my small ears, were in the leaves, were in the wing and the wood. About time to get a hammer, I thought. About time to get a nail and saw.
Wonderful.
All right, so I'm gonna read these two new poems, and then I'm gonna happily pass it over to Danez. So this is Desire Path, Equinox, and this is the one that I don't think I've read in front of an audience, so be gentle. Desire Path, Equinox. Blame Jupiter, its brightest moons. Blame the scapular ache, a cry I store in my wing where my wing would be. No reason, of course, for blame, but blame the mask I buzz. I've been at myself, fingers pruned and smelling of lemon, of sweet moss, late twilight and banked ember. I stoke my own tinder, make fire of what's left. Don't call it dream, but prophecy, an astronomer's eye taking time for distance, each constellation a bird drawn by an amateur. Seagull, seagull, a cry that carries over the water. Oh, I whisper your name when I'm close. Look, I say, look, I become the shortest distance between 2 points. Seagull, seagull, horizon. I misspoke earlier, said fire instead of fountain, drought instead of deluge. Once I was a mask, made a mess of your face, would do it again, be worn, but for a distance so great it becomes time. How long before a gull arrives in the desert, parched, aching, blown off course? Oh, it was meant for the sea, would settle for river as you were meant for me, that we settle for time, soon its wake, soon collapse. Look, I say, into your mouth, your ear, not near, but soon. I fill the room, a cloud scudding the moon, fingers glinting in a light of my own making. Thank y'all. And this last poem is for Melissa. It was a birthday present in the way of like a little kid making like a macaroni picture, but slightly better than a macaroni picture. But this is titled, What is the Measure? I catalog what I cannot capture, The sun, its ragged stumble into rock face, the precise elevation of this plateau or the next, the sea, of course, against which everything is measured. My tools are insufficient, inexact. For instance, there is no way to measure the peak against the distance from the tip of one ring finger to the other, no matter my arm's position, outstretched, limp, akimbo. For instance, there is no way to weigh the earth pushed out of earth against the gravity of my body, its bones, its sacks, its meat and animating light. I submit. I do not constitute the mountain, this in spite of the palette of old quilts and newly fallen maple leaves I've made at its immeasurable base. I submit. I do not constitute the field, although I have harrowed its length, its width, with my long feet, my slow step. Never mind, I hear what scurries or scatters, what burrows or bounds. Never mind, I raise my hand to hover the bent grass, the echinacea's bald crown, all of which withers or writhes, all of which is new or nearly the same before my foot's next fall. I submit. As with the mountain, the field. As with the field, you. Ineluctable as a season, sun ragging the rock face, your arm nearly as long as mine, your palm wider, your mouth a beginning, your eyes, of course, that against which everything else is measured.
Ooh.
You harrow, and the summit writhes. Your broad foot falls, and the field akimbo gives up its gravity, lets loose its bodies, its bones, thrums an animating light.
Wow.
Thank y'all. Thank you so much.
Oh, Donika Kelly, you are so good. No, seriously, I always feel reordered by your work whenever I encountered it, and at once I feel softened to the goodness and the complication of my life and of the world, but also sharpened into the language and accuracy of which you capture living with such attention. I love your work so much.
Thank you, Danez.
It's a pleasure. Okay, I'm gonna stand up to do this because I want y'all to see my outfit, and that's just how I was raised. Thank you, Target, Rosha, Docs. It's nice. Okay. All right. Visual description. Hi, my name is Danez Smith. A visual description of myself: I am a Black, non-binary person. I look like your uncle, but I feel like your auntie. Let's see. I have on maroon Doc Martens, baggy green pants, a pink collared shirt, a brown hat with jewelry in several places. I'm going to read one old and two new, I think, and then we'll dive into our conversation. I'm so excited to talk to Donika and Ruth. All right. Waiting on you to die so I can be myself. 1,000 years of daughters, then me. What else could I have learned to be? Girl after giving herself to herself, one long ring shout name, a monarchy of copper and cold shoulders. The body too is a garment. I learned this best from the snake undulating out of her pork rind dress. I crawl out of myself into myself, take refuge where I flee. Once I snatched out my heart like a track and found not a heart, but two girls forever playing slide on the porch in my chest. Who knows how they keep time? They could be a single girl, doubled and joined at the hands. I'm stalling. I want to say something without saying it, but there's no time. I'm waiting for a few folks I love dearly to die so I can be myself. Please, don't make me say who. Bitch, the garments I'd buy if my baby wasn't alive. If they woke up at their wake, they might not recognize that woman in the front making all that noise. That one? Sure. Cool. I wasn't thinking about this one, but let's do it. Let's hope. Apologies. I was part of the Joy Industrial Complex. Told them their bodies were miracles and they ate it up. Sold someday. Made money off soon and now. I snuck an ode into the elegy. Forced the dead to smile and juke. Applied America. Said destroy, but offered nary step nor tool. I paid taxes knowing where the funds go. In April, my offering to my mother's slow murder. By May, my sister filled with the bullets I bought. June, and my father's life locked in a box I built. My brother's end plotted as I spend. I don't know why I told you it would be okay. Not, won't. When they aren't killing you, they're killing someone else. Sometimes their hands at the end of your wrist. You and me, our agent and enemy. There I was, writing anthems in a nation whose victory was my blood made visible. My mother too sugared to weep without melting. My rage was their comfort foaming at my racial mouth, singing gospel for a God they beat me into loving. Lord, your tomorrow holds no sway. Your heaven's too late. I abandon you as you me for me. C'est la vie. But sweet Satan, OG dark kicked out the sky. First fallen and niggered thing. What's good? Who owns it? Where it come from? Satan. First segregation. Mother of exile. What you promise in your fire. For a real freedom, I offer over their souls. Theirs, mine's is mine's. I refuse any hell again. I've known near devils, the audience and the mirror. I make you look weak. I clap at my eulogies. I said encore, encore. We wanted to stop being killed, and I thanked me for beauty, and pitifully, I love them. I thanked them. I took the awards and cashed the checks. I did the one about the boy when requested, traded their names for followers in lieu of action. I wrote a book, edited my war cries down to prayers, oh devil. They gave me God and gave me clout. They took my poems and took my blades, Satan, like you did for God. I sang for my enemy, who was my God. I gave it my best. I bowed, even smiled. Teach me to never bend again. That one, no. Hold up. Y'all want a poem with some drag queens in it, or a poem? Yeah, okay, let's just do that. Okay, cool. Yeah, all right. This is called. I saw like some really good drag being performed in a very bad outfit, and I wrote this poem. All right. Queen performing, and I'm telling you I'm not going, in a blue dress, saloon bar, Minneapolis, July 2022. Even though I can see the safety pins holding up the cerulean gown fastened into the dark brown glittery turtleneck we're supposed to believe is starry skin, even if the wig is cheap, blonde, and begging your neck to stay still should it fall and reveal the fuzzy cornrows over your place sister's old stocking, even if the light isn't dim enough to make the plastic look like jewels, or if the corset's outline is a cracked bone beneath the blue stretch fabric, neon and unforgiving, the lipstick a shade too light, the rouge a touch too much, the song is running through you like a July black sky's electric kink. I'm here, weeping at your feet. $3 held out like a first prayer or the last prayer before the rest of your life. Who has seen me, barely held together, not worth a dime or a damn, night stained under eyes, blood broken, begging a coffin nearer and soonish, my blues, the only thing to my name, walking out on me. No will, no way. And I am. I still am. I was so close to the close of my era, my period, thank God, turned into commas, enough to make the rent, the light to eat, to hand a woman, raggedy and divine, what I can spare to lose. Released, spared from my own midnight plots, the long blurred years I slugged after my blood turned to shit, leaking flies when I cried. Now, the same blood that seeks to end me, that I sought to end, keeps me alive. What? My blues keeps me warm, not blue-lipped, not cold and unmourned. How? I'm not gonna leave you. I'm telling you, tomorrow is what the stars told me waits at their edge. The sun is just a brighter night. We survive more than we know, my fragile and fabulous family. You, black, late-come daughters, you, black, dust-found sons, you, black, blues-born somebodies, hooked here by blessings too small to call miracles. We can outlive our nightmares into our dream, girl. You, like me, who blueprinted your own finales. You, like me, who script your murders on your enemy's behalf. I'm telling you, I'm staying. I'm staying. And you, and you, and you, and you.
Wow. Oh, my stars. Those were beautiful readings. Thank you so much for those poems, both of y'all. I'd love to start, our session today is called The Power of Poetry, and I'd love to start with hearing from each of you. What does the power of poetry mean to you?
All right. Okay. Oh, it's such a broad question. I was talking with a friend last night about how strange it feels to have come to poetry and for it to be centered in my life in the way that it is, both in the making of it and the reading of it. And one of the ways that poetry orders my life, because it does, it anchors me. I feel connected to lineage, to line, to a great long flowing river of folks who have sought to make song out of the raw material of our lives. And it's amazing to me that there's still room to make poems after like thousands of years, that there is something in the way that like the way that a poem turns or the construction of an image that that is offered to me. And I think, yes, me too. I have had that is the experience of that thing, that like there's still ways for people to say that. It just feels remarkable to me. So it's like, for me, it's a measure of order, an anchor, but also community. I don't know, poems are just like, it's the highest art, et cetera, and so forth. Other people would argue that, but they're incorrect. So what do you think about that, Danez?
Well, I love everything that you said. I think I'm really gonna put at the top of a syllabus, making song out of the raw material of our lives. I really love thinking about that. As a reader, I think the power of poetry for me has always been to go to poems to find throughout history and in the current moment our shared bewilderment of life, of our dreams, of our lived experience, of what could be. And so poetry for me, I think why why I've started being a poet and why I kept being a poet was because whenever I hear poets, it is the least alone I feel in the world when I'm listening to a poem. And only, you know, only the most intimate moments with those I love can I think come close to, well, they might exceed, but they, you know, that is, it's like poems and like tender everythings, you know, with like my lovers and friends and family. When I feel the true human connection. And then when I'm writing it, I think the power is, I mean, it's ancient, right? And it's like, I do feel that that spellbinding, that conjure element that comes in poems when I'm writing it. I do feel like I am summoning the future. I feel like I am summoning myself back to myself. So many of my, you know, so many epiphanies about my life have happened in a poem when I wrote it down, and that was the first space that I allowed it to be true out loud in the world, outside of like the deep recesses of my mind. It was first true on the page. And then, you know, to like, even then to dare to like say these things in the air also feels like such a powerful magic and act. So yeah, I think poetry for me is just like the closest art is gonna get to like distilling humanity, you know, a little bit. And I'm thankful to film and fiction and dance and all that other kind of stuff too. But for me, poetry captures something so intangible and yet known about being human for me, and that's its power. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I love how each of you reference community also and the feeling of not being alone in the work through poetry. And I'm curious, you're both members of collectives, and here we are at AWP with this huge community of writers. I'd love to hear, how do you find and nurture your artistic community through writing?
Ooh. You know, I think sometimes it is through writing, but a lot of it is just through living experience. You know, I think how I nurture artistic community is really just through like taking care of each other. I mean, some of the, my favorite moments with poets have come from just sharing a meal together, from inviting somebody over to my house and cooking, or, you know, in the middle of an AWP saying like, let's skip the panel and go to the Cheesecake Factory and have, you know, and have an hour. It's been, you know, sitting up in people's hotel rooms and like sharing new work with all the poets around, going around in a circle, you know, the open mic, all that stuff is just how we care for each other. And I think it's just being, I think I get this from my good friend Fatima Asghar, that that community is also a genre and is also a practice, and that we can be intentional in the way that we love folks, right? And so not letting community happen by accident or only in the workshop or only in the reading, right? But opening our lives to each other, opening our homes to each other, being shelter for each other and being intentional about that, right? You know, some of my biggest poetry epiphanies have come together from just like, I have several groups of friends where we'll just say like, let's go to Hugh and Angel's graduation, or let's get an Airbnb out in California and just like everybody got a week and let's just be together. And so I think it's just, yeah, and then the writing happens, right? And I think the writing is fed by the life. And so I go to that week and I'm with my friends, and that feeds the next 6 months of poems, you know, from the conversations that, you know, and from the things we talked about that spun and eventually made their way into the lyric. So yeah, so I think it's just, how do you be a good community member? How do you be a good family member, play cousin, all that stuff to the poets who attend to your spirit? Can you attend to them with that same attention?
So I'll add to that, because that all sounds entirely correct to me. I'm deeply introverted and like have a deep well of nihilism. It is like very, very deep. It's like I don't believe in something higher. So then it's like, where am I anchored, and how do I make a life that feels, I won't say meaningful, because that might, like even then, like my nihilism's like, girl, meaningful. What does anything mean? But the thing that gives me comfort is my folks. Tending to, it's that tending. I think of like a lot of different kinds of relationships as gardens, and I'm not a gardener, but this feels like correct to me. It's like there are seasons where things are fallow. There are times when there, you know, like we retreat into the earth, and I am often retreating into my house. But because I have these anchoring points that are far flung from me, I can be drawn out. And so artistic community becomes the place where I'm asking myself to be present and alive to the moment. Our collective, Poets at the End of the World, I think it was AWP Tampa, maybe? Evie and Lyrae were like talking, and then me and Alma walked up, and maybe Nicole was there, like, you wanna be in a collective? And we're like, yeah, let's do it. It's like, obviously. And I didn't know what a collective, I'm still like, it's not a way that I am used to thinking, but I'm just saying yes. And that has changed my life, and just like getting to spend time with those folks, it widens the scope from like, what am I doing to what are we doing? And that shift into we just takes all the pressure off. Like, we winning, right? I don't have to win. I don't have to win anything. But are we winning? Yes. Yes, we are. And I often talk with my students about this. Like, they need friends. And the young poets who I work with who are so gifted, and I work with undergrads exclusively in my job. And I'm like, y'all need friends. You need someone who's gonna enjoy your strange metaphor about the great raft of loneliness on the horizon that is coming. Regular people don't want that. Poets have a high capacity for that nonsense, you know? And so I'm like, you have to find your people who are just like, yes, that was a lot and absolutely correct. And that's friendship. It's not just like networking. It's not just looking for mentors. It's being pals. It's being friends. It's putting in the time. I think there can be an approach to community that is about extraction. And I don't think that gets us anywhere. I think tending is the space to move through, and the process to be invested in.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
I mean, because I'm also going back to your gardening metaphor, thinking like when you just said that now, like it's who are you gonna allow yourself to show up, not in like your like AWP panel, like I have edited these poems, I have, worked on this presentation, but who are you messy with, Who are you like emailing at 3 o'clock being like, I'm a little drunk. Is this a poem? I don't know. I don't know what this is, or like, or you texting somebody a poem that you read and be like, okay, I recognize brilliance here. What's happening, right? And who are you geeking out about stuff with? That is what it's about. I thought about that too when you were mentioning being deeply introverted, right? That there's so many ways we connect to each other. And really, I think when you think about poetry community, it's about who are you allowing yourself to be your most vulnerable and unfinished with, and how are you allowing yourself to show up in these unperfected human ways, and like that happens in many small circles, And
I think there's a way that people will tell us that it's competitive and cutthroat, and if you were feeling that in your community, maybe you're in the wrong community. Like, I do think to be soft, to be able to be soft, to be in a space where that softness is welcomed and reciprocated, that's the space out of which like I have made something out of my life. It's not being in competition, because like what are we even competing for? Like I'm like, I just want to make stuff and have fun with my friends and eat some good food and sit. Everybody likes to walk. They just want to walk and walk. I'm like, can we sit? All my friends. Alma. It's like I'm sorry, she's right there looking at me. We're just like walking and walking and walking. And I was like, can we sit? Can we sit down? And we also do good sitting, but it's just like also balancing what it is that we desire, in friendship. So anyway.
Yeah, I love that. I love the framing of community as a practice, and I love thinking of it as a garden that we nurture. It's beautiful. I'd love to hear each of you talk a little bit about the evolution of your work and how, from your early collections to where you are now, have you changed how you thought about poetry?
Ooh. I think I am much more of a formalist than I started out as. I think coming from spoken word and stuff like that, I used to think, which very much is a form, and slam is a form, but I always thought about form as being like this antithetical thing to what I was doing. And then, I then continuing to read and just like opening my eyes to like what Gwendolyn Brooks is doing, you know, or what was doing, what Patricia Smith is doing as our like, you know, foremost formalists, or Natasha Tressaway, all these folks, right? Douglas Kearney. And so like now I think I used to be so in love with, I think the thing that got me, that gets many of us into poetry, I think, is an act of like catharsis, or this community, or like what poetry releases or introduces to your life. And now I'm just so much in love. I still love that, and I'm in love with the mathematics as well, right? And the nerdiness as well of like, how can I figure out these lines? What is the shape doing? Or what if I put the poems in a circle in a box? What if it's a sonnet? What if it's a triple sestina? What if, you know, like, I don't know. So like all those, you know, I fell in love with like the theater class and like the like emotional aspect of theater, of poetry, but now I like the math class of it all, you know, figuring out those things, the numbers, yeah.
A triple sestina, that is shocking to me.
Patricia did one. I tried to write a quadruple sestina one time and failed, but I kept the best parts, you know? Sometimes you gotta experience, that's also the thing too, right? I think I was like trying to reach like perfection.
Right.
And now I'm interested in like the messiness of the experiment, right? And that like there is such brilliance that happens in failure. And that's also the thing. I thought I was gonna like write all these like different books. I'm writing like my next book is like the same book I've been writing, and it's just like, here's what I think about this shit now, okay? And I think that was like a relief maybe that I'm finding, is that like I don't have to be done with my obsessions just because I have already talked about it, but I have more to add to this personal canon I'm building, and that I've written my own stuff, and I've gone and read these other folks, and now that now that I read Donika, this one I gotta put this shit down, like, so yeah, so I think that a relief maybe has changed of feeling like I'm gonna be a poet, and I think that has allowed for a certain like relaxation into the play of it all, and that I can keep on playing and keep on telling these stories, and it will be new.
I'll pick up a thread of what you said in there, which is, I want to say about process and lowering the stakes. So I think early on in my 20s, I had this sense of like, I needed to know where the poem was going. I needed to know what was going to happen. And I was really trying to drive the experience. And I don't know, I wrote a dissertation, and it was 200 pages of prose, and that was a terrible, harrowing experience. It wasn't, it was fine. Like, as it turns out, what does it even mean? But in that process, what I discovered was that I can just wander and not know, and something interesting might emerge from that wandering and not knowing. So I would say that happened towards the end of my 20s, like into my, like right at the beginning of my 30s. And I just like freed myself, or something about that process freed me, and I just started lowering the stakes. Like, no individual poem has to be good. Like, no poem that I sit down to write has to be whatever I imagine is a good poem. I can just like sit down and make something and then save it, and then look at it in like 2 or 3 years and be like, oh yeah, nice. So it's just like, so then my investment shifts away from the poem as a product into poetry as process. And out of that process comes a way of externalizing experience, looking at experience and interrogating, not through narrative, but through the lyric. What do I think? Why do I think it? Do I want to continue thinking in this way? Can I put it down? And poetry, I would say, like, for the renunciations, that was like a lot of what that work was what do I want to keep and what do I want to put down? And now, I don't even know what's happening now, but it's fun, is what I would say. And I'm not interested in the math per se, but I think I'm interested in the sort of meta experience of what are the moves that I have made. And I think this is something that can happen when one has volume, when one has a lot of poems, can look back across time and say, what are the moves that I have made? Why did I make that move? What does that move get me? Can I try to make that move now, and will it mean something new or different, or perhaps even something similar to what it meant before? So that externalizing reveals so much to me about me, and I am so interested in myself and my thinking, more so than anyone else could ever be. And I think that's correct. Like, I think that's right. And having, grown up in and been soaked in an environment that tells me as a Black, lesbian woman from a lower, so whatever, et cetera, whatever, it's like what I think doesn't matter. It's like my investment in my own thinking and then making art out of that, it just like gives wonder and purpose to my life that, again, helps counter some of the deep and abiding nihilism that I'm living with. You know, so, yeah.
I love that about the messiness and embracing process. And we have a room full of writers. If we could stay on that nerdy process thread for just a second, I'd love to hear a bit about your routines. Like what is your writing routine?
Oh, shit.
Do you have a routine?
Sometimes I need a routine.
Yeah.
So like after Homie, I didn't write for a year because I was exhausted. One of those fallow seasons like you were talking about before. And then a year after that, I didn't write for another year because the pandemic hit. And I was just like, the world's gonna end. And thankfully it hasn't yet. But I had to like make a routine after that. So like there was like a year where like I wrote a high bun every day. I would write a haiku first thing in the morning, which is typically the second part of the high bun, but that's what I would have, you know, the scruff for at like 6 a.m. And then at some point throughout the rest of the day, I would write the prose poem part. And I did that for probably about 5 months until I just was like, okay, let me write every day. But I needed to like write for a year. And so it was just like sort of after waking up, right before bed type thing. When I'm in book mode, I tend to like have a little bit more of a routine too. I wake up, I write in my journal, which is kind of a warm up, but also just like a check-in for myself. And then after that, you know, having written some language about just like what's going on in life, that typically I'm warmed up to either go edit a poem or write a new poem or take a walk until I think about a poem, listen to a podcast until, you know, somebody says something interesting that I'm like, cool, let me go write. So I think I dive in and out of it. Sometimes no. Sometimes it's like when the iron's hot, I try to strike it. Thank God for the Notes app. I think most of my poems start there these days. You know, something about that black background just feels not final. Maybe also since a lot of it is on the phone, it feels like less stakes than typing, or even writing by hand. Yeah, I like either this or this, the scribble, or how I typically tend to start my poems now. But there's no real process. I'll like write a poem, live with it for probably like a week, and then put it away for a while. A couple months, maybe, you know, like you were saying, years sometimes too. And then eventually I'm like, I should have a book. What have I been writing about? And I start to pull everything together and see how things are talking, and that usually inspires some new stuff to come in there. But no real I think you need as much discipline as you. Some people are better at that. Some people are not. I think also it's okay to know that our creativity sometimes goes towards living our lives, right? And I think as poets, it's important that we remember to live and be attentive to that, right? I think I felt very freed, like as a younger writer, hearing Carl Phillips talk about his writing process of like not writing for months at a time and then just like sitting down and sort of letting these poems fall out of him. And it made me feel better because you just ain't got time all the time. Sometimes you got a fucking job. Sometimes your kid is hungry. Sometimes you're fucking depressed. Sometimes you're fucking grieving, you know? And knowing that poetry will always be there, that you can sort of add the layers of discipline and rigor and, you know, format when you need to. And so I think I come in and out of it. I let my life be lived, and then when I feel that well of inspiration, I try to be a little bit more calculated about when I'm coming to the page.
I too do not have an ongoing regular routine, like a daily. I don't have a daily practice. Whenever I hear people who have daily practices, I'm like, that sounds really interesting. I cannot do that. And so part of it is having a job. And I teach, and I love teaching. It's fun. I have a good time with students. But I like to write from like 10 at night to 1 in the morning, like somewhere in that window, and I can't actually do that when I'm teaching. Like I think I used to have it again in my 20s, and now I'm like, well, I gotta go to bed at like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, because I gotta get up at 7 so that I can get ready for my day, and that just means that time isn't available, or maybe Melissa's around, and She likes to go to bed, I don't know, like 9 o'clock. And so I'm like, oh, well, I guess it's bedtime. So like when she's away, or it's summer, or it's the winter break, I have like these long stretches of time where like there is lots of time to work, and to make work, and to spend time with my thoughts. And I usually do that in the summer and across winter break. But last year, I do want to say this, last year I took a couple of workshops. So I took an online workshop with Samia Bashir, which was wonderful. It was like, I think it was like the speed version of it, but it was like such a great time. And I just like made some stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, okay. And then in the fall, I took a 6-week workshop through Night School Bar, which is out of one of the Carolinas. I'm so bad at keeping track of the Carolinas. And it was with a poet, Lauren Hunter, and I was just a student in the class, you know? And like every once in a while I would like want to be like, well, I know lots of things, and I would just like write my name. I'm like, you need to be quiet and listen. Which was like, it's so good. It's like, it's a good way of like decentering my ego, but it gave me a routine that I actually needed in the middle of the semester, and it gave me something to look forward to. That felt just fun and like very incredibly deeply low stakes. And yeah, it's like when I think a poem is close to being done, I'll change the font on the title, you know, and then I'll save it. And I'm like, and everything's just like in my folders. I have many, many folders. It's like by year, and it goes back to like 2005. Like, why would anybody, I don't even look in those folders, but it feels comforting to know that I could if I needed to, you know. And yeah, like I just like printed out a bunch of poems, and I was like, oh yeah, might be something in here. Yeah. Let's go look. But like it's 6 or 7 years worth of work. But for 6 or 7 years, I was just writing. Like not because I thought this will go in a book or this is a book, but that like the process and the practice of writing is just fun and again, orienting. So I just like try to keep it very low stakes, very low pressure. Nothing has to go anywhere or be good or seen by anyone else. And that means I get to be my own first audience. And I can think about what I love in poems and in poetry and try to do that.
The only thing, one thing I want to add is just that like if there is anybody who's like, if this is a question you're thinking about, like, so when I had one of those 40-hour-a-week jobs that was like really 50, 60-hour-a-week jobs, you know? And I felt like totally not a poet when I was at that job because it just took up so much space in my life. And one thing I started doing was having half an hour or an hour, if I could stretch it, a day where I told myself I was attending to my poet self. And that might have been writing new work, that might have been editing new work, that might have been submitting work, that might have been just reading work, right? Like browsing a lit mag or, you know, picking up that book that has been at the top of my to-be-read pile for 3 months and stuff like that. So, you know, and I know like, you know, I that has changed now that I have a little bit more space in my life, but I still go back to that whenever I get a little bit more hectic. So if there is anybody trying to figure out like how do I keep the space to be a writer within the you know constellation of everything I have to do, whatever that time is for you, touch poetry. You know, even if it's not your own. Reading is also being a poet. Yeah, try something like that.
I had a friend who she and I would do sort of asynchronous check-ins. Like we would agree to write together for a week for 20 minutes, just 20 minutes. And we would just write, we would text each other and say, did it, and like that. And it was just like for a week. And it was so nice, because again, very low stakes, 20 minutes. I'm always like, you know, fooling around on my phone. I do that for 20 minutes easily every, you know, few hours. And so to like hold that 20 minutes and say, I'm gonna write something or I'm gonna read something, it just like, when, like, it would help me sort of get jump started if I hadn't been writing for a while. Yeah.
I so appreciate your generosity in sharing that, and I love what you say about making it low stakes and making space for it, even if you're just touching it. You both spoke about reading as you were talking about that, and I wonder what books have been nourishing you lately that you want everybody in the audience to go out and pick up.
Okay, last year, books that I really love. Oh, right now, okay, the book I like brought with me to AWP was Black Swim by Nicholas Goodley. Such an incredible writer who, like, I just never know what is gonna happen on the other side of the line break. Just like completely leaves me, I think my favorite work, because I'm not good at it, I love poets who leave me off kilter with what's gonna happen next. I think I'm a little bit of a predictable girl and I like that, but you know, so my taste tends to be a little bit of the things that I find difficult and hard to do. I really loved last year, Kim, what's Kimmy's last name? Abdi, right?
Yeah.
Kimmy Abdi's Against Heaven was a phenomenal collection that I really liked. And I think made me, it got me, I don't know, it just made me so excited for poetry again. And not like anybody else that made me unexcited, but I think it was a book that just reignited my eyes in what I was reading. And so it was great, and it made everything else I read that year fantastic as well, because just reinvigorated something. Anything else that I've really been loving? I just started watching, not a book, but what's that damn show, The Rehearsal? Where the guy from Nathan For You like helps people rehearse difficult conversations that they're gonna have. He creates like whole simulations of like, we're gonna remake the bar that you play trivia at so you can tell your friend that you don't actually have a master's degree. And they practice. And it's wild. And I was like, that's what we do in poems. That's all I'm doing. I'm just like making a little simulation so I can tell my grandma it's hard sometimes, you know? Like, wow, this is brilliant. And so, yeah, so The Rehearsal, which I think, you know, we're just witnesses and rehearsing what happens in life in the poem. So The Rehearsal has been making me think a lot about poetry. Shout out to HBO. Yeah.
What have I been reading? It's like I knew this question was coming, and I was like, I'm gonna write things down, and then I absolutely did not. So my mind is sort of moving somewhat frantically, like, what are the things? But what comes first to mind is Ama Kojo's Bluest Nude, which, such a good book. So good. And like such a grown book. And just like so confident in its moves and warm and assured. Just like, I don't know. Everyone who I've heard talk about this book has been like, we've been waiting for this book, which is true. Mm-hmm. If you haven't read it, I would just like highly recommend that. So I'm doing an independent study this semester with a student, and I just want to tell y'all what we've read so far because the books are really good. So we read Gwendolyn Brooks' In the Mecca, which is, it has like the Sermon to the Warpland, and is it like second Sermon to the Warpland or Sermon to the Warpland 2? But the long poem In the Mecca is also just like so interesting and strange and not necessarily what I think we might expect from Gwendolyn Brooks. We read Eyes, Killing Floor. Whew. No, we read Sin. I is so scary. The poems are so scary, and I think, can I be scary? I don't want to be scary like that. And then Lucille Clifton's Quilting, like that specific collection, gorgeous. Just like an absolutely, like my student and I were just like, like over sandwiches, you know? Like we were just like so thrilled and enlivened. And then just recently, June Jordan's Haruko love poems. So like I wanted to read Black women this semester, and I told my student that's what we were doing. I was like, what do you want to do? She was like, I don't know. And I was like, great. Then this is what we will do. And you know, it's always hard to consider like what's forward, but like I think of who I return to, and that like I return to Gabby Cavalcaresi's Rocket Fantastic. That's such a strange, erotic book, and also vulnerable and tender, and it's one that I return to a lot. Carl Phillips' work, just like across the board, but Writing Westward I love. I mean, like I think about the books that like I'm often teaching and reaching for and handing to students. Those are the books that like feel really nourishing to me and help me think about what poetry can do. Not necessarily what I can do, because I can't do like what those folks are doing sort of in the technical aspects, but just like, can I be more myself in the poems? You know, like those are all poets who like help me figure out, can I be more Donika and less like hiding behind, like, and sometimes like that hiding is really helpful, but I don't know, these are all poets where there's a vulnerability there, there's a forwardness there, and I'm just trying to get to that so often.
Word.
Yeah.
2 more books, or maybe a couple more. I just want to offer. We giving lists. I love giving lists.
Yeah.
Cynthia Dawi Oka's "Fire Is Not a Country," phenomenal. I put that on a lot of students' reading lists recently. I was also talking about I a lot lately. Just thinking about like, what would her work be like released right now? Has been a question I've been thinking about for a couple of weeks. So read I if you haven't yet. Douglas Kearney's work as a whole, but if you haven't read Optic Subwoofer, the new like series of lectures that Wave put out, it's really great. Been thinking about craft, and like I found Carl Phillips's new craft book as well.
I haven't read it yet, but I'm
oh,
so
it's
excited.
so good.
I just love his craft work. Like his craft essays are just like so smart, and I think yes.
Yeah,
I don't
and
know
like
how
you
to
get
do
stuff
that.
about the poems too, but like if you're looking for just like a companion about like thinking about living the life of a writer, and how to like just like attune your vision and your walking through the world to that of a poet, I just found it so refreshing. It was water to read that collection, and it's called My Trade is Mystery, right? Yes, My Trade is Mystery. Yeah.
I'm scribbling madly. This is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Give it a National Book Award.
Yeah. All right, we'll work on that.
I want to see it on the nonfiction long list. God damn it. Okay.
We'll whisper it in the judges'
Okay, yeah.
I'm curious, you mentioned the rehearsal, and as you're recommending things, what other things are feeding your practice right now? Is it music? Is it movies? Is it television shows? Are there other things you love?
Ooh, being engaged. I don't know. I actually was like, I think I was like having a little in my heart moment. I was like, it's so beautiful that both of us are up here as like Black queer folks in the world writing and like loved. That feels so powerful. And so love has given me a lot of things, and a new love. I feel like I've always had love in my life. Thank God for friends. But like, I got somebody who like brings me water in the morning and also sex sometimes. That's great.
That's right.
What else? Doing like art things that I have no proficiency in, and no desire to be a professional. Like I've been doing a lot of visual art, although a little bit of me is like, I should have an exhibit. Skating, I fucking love skating, and I started doing it in the pandemic, and like, I think moving my body in different ways has been really lovely for my work. I think a lot of my poems seriously have started while either skating or at the gym or on a walk or something like that these days. So I've been really thinking about this connection between body and mind, and that's been helpful. And healing my spiritual practice has also been very healing. I grew up as a church baby, and that was great, and that was also complicated, and that was also horrible. But like, getting into, I took a wonderful workshop last year with Jada Renee Allen about just ancestor worship, and so doing that, and also like dipping my toe back in my Christian roots with a little bit more armor now that I'm not, a tender child, but an adult who knows that these people are stupid. So I think like that's also been very healing. Now that I'm in my 30s, I've been like, how do I attend to the relationships in my life that I want to mend? I want to have good relationships with my dad and my siblings and all this other kind of stuff. And so allowing space for healing or forgiveness and distance has also been just very good in my life. So it's been helping.
Yeah, maybe along some of those same lines, like just getting to the ocean. I have been landlocked, just in and out of like certain periods in my life. I grew up in LA, and there's something just about like being near the water that is just so orienting. So getting to oceans, I guess maybe there's just one, but getting to like assorted coasts, and just like looking at the water, sitting like a true Californian on the beach and not getting into the ocean, but just looking. I really like doing that. That's been really, really helpful. I don't know. I like Abbott Elementary. I need things that are soft but like sweet. I just like, because the world is hard. I can't do like prestige dramas. Like my spirit does not have that. But
Wait, but
it's a sitcom.
have you watched Downton Abbey?
you know, I watched like the first 2 seasons, and then I was like, it's the same. They're like, oh no, we're really rich, but we get to keep our things.
Exactly. And they're so concerned about the napkins. It's so great.
But what I really love about Abbott Elementary is that like it's a sitcom.
Yeah.
I just like I love a sitcom. I've been rewatching Living Single. I keep the Golden Girls just on all the time. But then like in terms of movies, you know, like I'm just like, what could I possibly watch? You know, that's like I've seen before. I don't know. I'm not even about to go down that path. But like my tastes are sometimes deeply, deeply basic, and I really like that. You know, like I don't need to be like complicated in my film consumption. I watch action movies, so so I think just like just doing what feels good, watching what feels good, not trying to keep up with whatever people say is good. I'm like, that looks sad. I'm not gonna watch that because I'm sad by myself. I don't need help. It's hard being in America. I'm like, what's gonna make me feel like, what's gonna give me a whisper of hope?
Yeah.
Because I think that's all I can ask for at this point. It's just like a whisper. And the ocean does that. The ocean does that for me constantly.
Amen.
So, yeah.
I'm kind of dying to ask you about love poems because you both write such beautiful love poems, but I promised you a chance to ask one another a question that you really wanted to. So I think that's kind of probably the thing we have time for. So, Donika, what are you dying to ask Danez?
Danez, I am dying to ask. No. One of the things that I think I see in your work is this reaching toward tenderness. I think that maybe sometimes earlier, kind of like not a skepticism of tenderness, but like not necessarily wanting to step all the way into it. I don't know if that makes sense. Like to be tender to like yourself, the speakers. And I'm just curious, like, has that changed over time? Do you feel that change over time, that softening that maybe you've been talking about? Does that make sense?
I think it's changed. I mean, honestly, I think the next book that'll come out next year is probably the least tender of them all. It's very self-critical, very critical of the world too. There's some tenderness in there, but I think, I don't know, I think I love my mother, and I think she taught me to always not live in anger or frustration, even though those things are very real, that you should be reaching towards some type of peace or softness or release. And so I think that's what makes me go towards tenderness. But I don't know, I think what also it is like I always say I'm not like a joyful poet, but I'm trying to point towards joy in the midst of some other emotion. And I think that's where it comes from. I just like, you know, if I allow myself, I will become the ultimate pessimist. And so I have to hold like some pearl of optimism in the work, because I think that is what I feel like is useful to people who encounter the work. And what I want to offer the world is not just like, I just want to offer, I think, a sense of peace and hope and all this other kind of stuff. Even if I'm saying we got to burn all this shit down, there's hope in that, right? So I think that's where the tenderness comes from, and I think I want to maybe try to challenge that, because I think it also is a reflex, right? It's the point towards that tenderness, and so a little bit now I'm asking myself, like, how can I cut instead of be tender in the work? So yeah, seeing what happens there.
I have a follow-up question, which is just like, why?
I don't know.
You don't know? It's just like,
I don't know. There's still tenderness. I don't want to say it's all, like, you
yeah.
know, but I think I was writing a very, like, guilt-ridden and, like, heavy collection. And, like, luckily I have, like, in the community of writers, I sent it out to some folks, and one friend just came up to me and was, like, shook me and was just like, don't do that, you know? Like, this is nothing. Like, nobody needs to see you perform guilt. Nobody needs to see you perform these things. It's not useful. And I was very grateful, because then that allowed a lot more of the tender and loving and, like, you know, maybe cutting, but also with, like, a, you know, a cuddly blade to happen in the work. You know, so I think it was just like I needed to have those conversations with myself. You know, I think when I got into my, like, early 30s, I needed to do some self-shucking. You know, what is not, you know, very Saturn's return energy, you know, what is not going to serve me in these next revolutions around the sun. And so how can that's where the work turned. It just turned into that shedding. And I think I needed to, like, write the shedding poems to then be able to write the, like, new body poems as
Right,
well, you
right.
know?
So like the molting.
Yeah,
The
you
molting
know, and so
poems,
we get to see the whole thing, I think, in
Yeah.
the next book. My question for you, you do so much wonderful things with myth, and also with just like holding up, I think, like different speakers. Like I'm thinking about Moon Rose Over the Bay, you know, like you're a fucking farmer. Right? But it still feels like, I still feel like kind of you in the mind of that person a little bit. I just want to ask you, like, what attracts you to the eyes you look through in your poems? So oftentimes, I think, talk about your own life in some ways, too.
Yeah. I think this was perhaps more like most true in Bestiary, where there were so many personas and that was those were some of the few places where there was an I and not a you or a we. And I think I was just like scared to speak from myself. And when that collection was complete, I thought, I want to try to have a speaker who looks more like me, who is more like me, is not quite me, but is like someone similar to me. But then in the Renunciations, there were like these oracles, and the oracles are doing this work that is like, some of it's narrative, some of it's like sort of historical contextualizing inside my life. And it felt scary to speak as an I that was me, like me in that work. I needed the distance. So like what the personas do is give me room and space to try out things, to try on things, to try to say things that it's much scarier to say when it's me as myself. So then I can say the thing as myself. So it's like it's a step. So it's like it's almost like training wheels. And I think about this thing, like Jericho Brown said this like many, many, many years ago. He was talking about please. So his first book, and he has track 5, Summertime, which is one of my favorites. It's the Janis Joplin persona poem. And in that poem, the speaker goes, I'm such an ugly girl. I'm such an ugly girl. And Jericho was saying like, Jericho can't say that, you know, but Janis Joplin can say it. Even if that's like a feeling that Jericho has. And I think about that for myself too. It's like, I have not ever once in my life pounded the earth for anyone, you know, but like as a centaur, like obviously that's the thing a centaur would do. Like, but me, look at this, like that's not the energy or the vibe. And so it's funny when people are like, yes, and I'm just like, huh. Okay, because I'm over here just like, let's look over here. Let's look away. I'm having a lot of feelings. So it allows me, like some of those eyes, some of those personas allow me access to ways of knowing myself that aren't possible if the voice is more like me. But it's been fun and also more vulnerable, but then also more rewarding to have poems that are coming from an I who's more like me. Like that has felt like important. So now I think, I can just do whatever I want, as I have been doing for the last so many years.
It's a perfect note to end, because alas, we're out of time.
time.
This has been such an amazing, nourishing, beautiful conversation. Thank you both. Thank you for your work in the world.
Thank you.
Join me in thanking these wonderful poets. Yeah. So everybody, please go buy their books and meet us out there in the signing area to get them signed for you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.